3, 2, 1. Okay. Hey again, and welcome to another video on music appreciation. Today we're going to be talking about the Romantic Age, or also known as the Romantic period of music. We'll be talking about some of the world events that took place, and also a little bit on the musical background as well. But to first start off, we have events such as the London Conference that took place on July 27th of 1830, or it's also known as the July Revolution. Charles X of Bourbon monarch is overthrown. Louis Philippe I, Duke of Orleans, takes his place. You have the Legitimists versus the Orleanists. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. You have the Constitutional Monarchy to July Monarchy. The names was basically switched. Then you had countries going up against each other, such as Russia and Britain, France, the Ottoman Empire, and Sardinia. So it was basically Russia almost against everyone. The Ottoman Empire was starting to lose steam or traction on Jerusalem, which is also considered to be the Holy Land. Britain and France did not want Russia to gain more land, and they backed the Ottoman Empire up. The Russians defended Orthodox Christians, and France had defended Catholics. The battles that took place that are most notable are the Battle of Grochow, the Battle of Ostroleka, and the Battle of Warsaw. Then you have events such as the Night at the Opera, which basically had a large demonstration of sorts to protest for having freedom of press, freedom of assembly, arming the people, written constitutions, a parliament, and then you had two small uprisings that were shut down, and then it was consisted of Belgians living in France who wanted to bring the revolution to their home country of Germany. But shortly afterwards, the group was stopped before reaching Belgium, and then there was another group as well, and that was also stopped upon Brussels. And then you had other wars, such as the First Italo-Ethiopian War and the First Sino-Japanese War, the Spanish-American War. You had the Greco-Turkish War as well, and then you had Ferdinand fleeing, and upon return started protesting again, and that resulted in Austrian troops firing upon unarmed demonstrations during this time when this event took place. And there is much more revolutions and wars that took place between 1830 and 1900, but as for right now, that's just a little demonstration or a little presentation, more like, not a demonstration, as to what took place. Now we'll move on to more of the musical background of the Romantic Age. And it's also called musical romanticism, and that is basically marked by emphasis on originality and individuality. So again, this is like with the classical and a little bit of the Bork or Baroque period, as it was trying to focus more on being more original, but also having some sort of individuality to it as well, starting from the Bork period, but now it's given more emphasis, as it says, or as it's being claimed to be in the Romantic period, which started about hundreds of years ago. This period is mostly about emotional expression and freedom and experimentation of form. You had composers such as Beethoven and Schubert that bridged both the classical and Romantic periods together to make it more connected. So you could basically say that the Bork, the classical, and the Romantic period, all three come together as one. So you could say that all three have their own subsections, but they all have one kind of music that they play. And it could be even theorized that all of these have one big period that go through hundreds of years of evolution. But the formal musical techniques were stemmed from the classical period, but it was more intensely personal feeling, and their use of pragmatic elements provided an important model for the 19th century Romantic composers at the time. This area was mostly used to dramatize heavily on the music, to make it bigger, sound louder, and have more impact and power to it than the previous period. Instrumental repertoire, and by the creation of new musical forms such as the Lied, Nocturne, Intermezzo, Capriccio, Prelude, and Marcusa, and I think there was one more after that too, but I don't know. These were introduced during the Romantic period. The Romantic spirit often found inspiration in legends, like fairy tales, like Merlin and King Arthur, and stories like that. They tried to use these lyrics in their song, well, if they had lyrics, they tried to have their songs kind of be like how they would feel during these legends and these fairy tales, as if they were like legends of their own, which in some respect they are, but not of the fairy tale kind. And then you have the overture and incidental music, which is another distinguishing feature of Romantic music. Principal composers of the first phase of the Romantic period were Hector Berlioz, Frederick Chopin, Felix Mendelssohn, and Franz Liszt. These composers were responsible for pushing orchestral instruments to their limits of expressing themselves and expanding the harmonic vocabulary, you could say, to exploit the full range of the chromatic scale, and explored linking of instrumentation and the human voice. So they would add a lot more vocals to their instrumental background. The middle phase of the Romantic period was represented by Antonin Dvorak, Edvard Grieg, and Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Sorry if I pronounced those names wrong. I'm sorry. Romantic efforts were supposed to express a particular nation's distinctiveness through music that was manifested in the works of the Czechs, Antonin Dvorak and Bedřich Semeton, and by various Russian, French, and Scandinavian composers. So this age was mostly dominated by Asian and European composers. The classical period was more of European-based, but by the time this Romantic age rolled around, people from Asia started to come in as well, but more so like Russia. But then more European nations such as Scandinavia started to show up with composers of their own that have been working on music for quite a while. And then you had the Romantic age popping up in Germany as well, beginning with the works of Carl Maria von Weber. Even though the Romantic period, Romantic opera per se, more accurately speaking, was being developed in Italy, the composer for that was Gaetano Donizetti, Vincenzo Bellini, Gaio Acino Rossini, and these were the people responsible for the Italian Romantic opera. This was brought to the height of its development by Giuseppe Verdi, and the Romantic opera in Germany culminated in works by Richard Wagner, who combined and integrated such diverse strands of Romanticism, and it became a lot more popular during this time, and not just in Germany, but in other European countries, who would later on replicate these kind of musics and intertwine them with their own music. Almost like an inspiration of sorts. And then you have 19th century and early 20th century composers such as Gustav Mahler, Richard Strauss, Edward Elgar, and Jean Sibelius during the later part of the Romantic period, who took the stage by storm during the later period, or during the later years of the Romantic age. To delve deeper into more of these characters, we'll start with Niels Gade. Niels Gade was born on February 22nd of 1817, and he died in Denmark of December 21st, 1890, Copenhagen. He was a Danish composer who founded the Romantic Nationalist School in Danish music. Gade was responsible for studying violin and composition and became acquainted with Danish poetry and folk music. He had friends who were also composers, such as Schumann and Mendelssohn, were attracted by his Scandinavian character in his music. Schumann wrote of him in the Neue Zürcher für Musik, and in 1843, Mendelssohn conducted Gade's first symphony in Leipzig. Gade conducted in Leipzig from 1844 to 1848 and became conductor of the Copenhagen Musical Society in 1850. About 16 years later, he became a director of the new Copenhagen Conservatory. Gade's early works reflecting spirit of Danish folktales, so like I said earlier, a lot of the music in the Romantic age was heavily influenced by fairy tales and folk legends during the earlier days of the of every country that ever existed. So you could take legends from Britain, you could take legends from Scandinavia, you could take fairy tales from Russia, and then deeper south with like the Philippines, and then over about more southwest you could go to Africa, and then Spain, Mexico, and all these other different places that would have been heavily influenced by such folk legends in their cultures. Gade's earlier works, reflecting spirit of Danish folk tones, were among the first of the 19th century examples of the use of native musical idioms and national themes. Under the influence of Mendelssohn, his later works showed greater technical command, often at the expense of the style that had made his earlier works more attractive. He had pieces of music such as Echoes from Ossian and In the Highlands, the Gitanas, Zion, the Crusaders, and Psyche. 8 symphonies, 3 ballads, a violin concerto, a string quartet, and other works, including. If we move on, we have another person. Let's see if I can find composer. Yeah. Okay. So our next person that we'll be more focused on is Edvard Grieg, which is one of the previous composers that we talked about earlier. Edvard Grieg was a Norwegian composer. He was born on June 15th of 1843, but he died on September 4th of 1907 in Bergen. He was responsible for finding the Norwegian National School of Music. His father, Alexander Grieg, was a British consul at Bergen. The Grieg family was of the Scottish origin, the composer's grandfather having emigrated after the Battle of Culloden. His mother, Ginsine Hagerup, who belonged to a well-established Norwegian family, studied music at Hamburg from the age of 6. Grieg received piano lessons from her, and in 1858, at the recommendation of the violinist virtuoso Ole Bull, he entered the Leipzig. So he was in the same organization as Niels Gade. He was also influenced by Mendelssohn and Schumann as well. During this time, he unfortunately suffered a severe attack of pleurisy, from which he never really recovered from. It's not something you would want to have happen, but sometimes you have to suffer in order to fulfill your dreams. As vague as that sounds, that's basically what he had to go through in his personal life. But in 1863, he went to Copenhagen, where he where his development came into association in 1864 with a young Norwegian nationalist composer such as himself, Rikard Nordack. Through him, said Grieg, and this is his words, I first learned to know the northern folk tunes and my own nature. And they became friends afterwards as well. And they would also work on music together. In the winter of 1864 to 65, Grieg became one of the founders of the Copenhagen Concert Society, Utrecht, for the production of works by young Scandinavian composers. He married his cousin in 1867, who was named Nina Hagerup, who became an authoritative interpreter of his songs. He spent his winters in 65, 66, and on to 69 and 70 in Rome, where he first met Ibsen and also Liszt, who was also roused to enthusiasm by his piano concerto. In 1866, he settled in Christiania, remaining there until 1874, when he was granted an annual stipend of 1,600 crowns by the Norwegian government. And then in 1885, he built his home Troldhagen near Bergen. In spite of poor health, Grieg made several tours in Scandinavia, on the continent, and in England. And playing his last piano concerto was in London, or one of his last concertos would be in London of 1888. And as we move on, we'll go on to